James Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Crausby, and thank you for looking after this committee as well as you are currently doing it. I pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Gosport, who never misses an opportunity to speak up for the Royal Navy and for Gosport, and I'm delighted by the fact that she is serving as the chairman of the subcommittee of the all-party group for the armed forces, of which I'm chairman, looking after the Royal Navy, and she does a very good job at it too, and I thank her for that. I also pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Hexham, who has laid out in barristeresque detail and clarity the case for the continuing independence and right of determination, self-determination of the Falkland Islands. And I won't attempt to repeat nor to disagree with anything he may have said. He's absolutely right in what he said, and I'll expand on it a little bit in a moment, but without the same learned qualities that he was able to bring to his contribution. I think he was right, Mr. Crausby, by starting his speech by paying tribute to the 255 British servicemen whose bodies lie in cemeteries in the Falklands to this day. It was the last war, I think, in which service bodies were not returned to the United Kingdom. In remembering them and the sacrifice which they made for the freedom and independence of the Falkland Islands, I think one should also remember the very many servicemen who came home but who have suffered from terrible injuries as a result of their service to this day. It was a very great pleasure to welcome Simon Weston to Wootton Bassett Town Hall, the High Street in Wootton Bassett recently, to turn on the Christmas lights. And to think of the sacrifice and the effort which someone like Simon Weston and others have made to helping other servicemen like themselves. And of course, also in Wiltshire, we're very fortunate to have the home of Help for Heroes and the very excellent home for injured servicemen of subsequent wars in Tedworth, which is just in the process of being completed, which I visited last week. It's terribly important at a time like this we should remember not only those who gave their lives for us for the freedom, as 255 of them did, but also think and make efforts to help the very many servicemen, 52,000 altogether in the United Kingdom, who suffer for the rest of their lives as a result of the service which they gave. In that context, if I may be permitted just a very slight deviation to my own constituency, I think particularly of the servicemen from RAF Lynham, as it then was, although sadly, thanks to the previous government, it no longer is RAF Lynham. It's going to become a training depot, cross-service training depot. But in those days, the Hercules fleet were based in RAF Lynham, and they performed magnificent service in ferrying people up and down to Ascension and onwards to the Falklands. And also in my own constituency, we were delighted last Thursday to have given the freedom of the town of Chippenham to 9 supply regiments of the Royal Logistics Corps, who are the largest regiment of the British Army. Colonel Bob, my honourable friend, might be interested to hear. 9 supply regiment in Levington were given the freedom of Chippenham, and they made significant, or their predecessors made significant contributions also in supplying all that was needed during the great conflict 30 years ago just now. And now, Mr. Crausby, the thrust of the debate today is very plain, and that is that people in dependent territories, and indeed elsewhere, according to the United Nations, must have the right of self-determination. There can be no question about that whatsoever. Most of the wars that we have fought over the last 100 years have been in the interests of freedom and of self-determination. It is right that people should be able to say for themselves who it is that they wish to run their country. And as my honourable friend mentioned a moment ago, that indeed is the principle that lies behind the debate that we're currently having with regard to the referendum in Scotland, although that would be beyond the scope of this particular debate. But it's absolutely right that people should be able to say, I wish to remain one way or another. And I suggest that if we challenge the 3,000 people who currently live in the Falklands to do so, the Foreign Secretary will receive 3,000 letters tomorrow morning indicating that every single one of the 3,000 wished to remain members, wished to remain British, wished to retain the British passport, be part of Great Britain, to be dependent territories of the United Kingdom. There's no question whatsoever about the unanimity and strength and desire of the people of the Falklands to do that. Now, with this background, it's only right that we as a nation should make the clearest possible noises, send the clearest possible messages to the Argentinian government that under no circumstances will we consider anything like military action towards the Falklands. Although I have to say in passing, Mr. Crausby, that I think the likelihood of military action against the Falklands is extraordinarily unlikely. I think there's not even the remotest possibility that the Argentinians will consider having a replay of the war. But nonetheless, they are choosing this time to make saber-rattling noises for political reasons that they might do so. So it's not only that we should say that we will defend the Falklands to the last man. Of course we would do. There's no question about that whatsoever. It would be entirely impossible to imagine that we wouldn't do. But more important than that is what lies behind it, namely that we should be ready to say firmly and clearly to the Argentinians, and in saying this, incidentally, we should echo these messages to other parts of the world, to come back to in 1 second, that we do not believe that saying that the Falklands is part of Argentina, we do not believe that using the word the Malvinas is right. That of itself, just saying that, just making those noises, undermines the right of self-determination of the people of the Falklands, and that should not be allowed under international law. We should make it absolutely plain to them that we won't consider that, won't allow them to continue to do that. And of course, there are all sorts of ways in which we could persuade the Argentinian government of that wisdom. They depend on us for all kinds of things. They want a sensible relationship with the rest of the world, and it's important that making rude noises, shall we call it, about the Falklands should form an important part of negotiations they might have with us about other things. It's outside the scope of this debate, but nonetheless, this morning we hear of Spain making strange remarks on the subject of the independence and freedom of Gibraltar. And I think that what we say in this debate about the Falklands is mirrored exactly in the way that we approach the independence and freedom of the people of Gibraltar. The people of Gibraltar have the right to decide whether or not they wish to remain British. I'm certain, having visited recently, that they do to a gigantic extent. And we must say to the government of Spain, no matter what other relationships may be, what we did in the Falklands, we do precisely the same thing with regard to Gibraltar if you were foolish enough to try and tread on our toes in that particular way. So I think it's important that we should reiterate the principle of independence and self-determination. In congratulating my honourable friend for calling this debate, I have only one slight regret. He may not realise that the 10th of January to this day is celebrated in the Falkland Islands as Thatcher Day, and a good thing too. It's a shame we couldn't have this debate on Thatcher Day, that being the date on which she visited the Falkland Islands 6 months or so after the war was over. It's important that we should remember the part which she played, a great woman, the part which she played in maintaining the freedom and independence of the Falkland Islands. Let's not forget it. I personally don't like the Iron Lady. I think it's not a particularly tasteful thing to have done. And on an occasion like this, it's right that we should pay tribute to the great Margaret Thatcher for the wonderful work which she did in preserving the freedom and independence of the people of the Falkland Islands. Now, of course, the question of whether or not there might be any risk of military intervention in the Falklands, I've already touched on. I don't believe there is. I don't believe that the Argentinians are foolish enough to even contemplate doing anything of the sort. And I very much agree with my honourable friend for Beckenham, who a moment ago said the quality and the strength of defence that we have in the Falklands, equally evidenced by my honourable friend for Gosport and her visit with the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme last year, is such that no one, whether it be the Argentinians or anyone else, possibly consider doing that. There are a couple of minor concerns I might have, particularly with regard to the outlying islands. I'm very much involved with South Georgia, and South Georgia, of course, is the place where the Argentinians landed the first of all those years ago, and South Georgia to this day remains exposed to some degree, and of course quite a remote place, entirely populated by rats, which we're doing our best to eradicate at the moment. South Georgia is a place we have to keep an eye on, I think, and make sure there's no possible intervention there. I think also the Argentinians have made some very foolish remarks with regard to Antarctica. And Antarctica is covered by the treaty, and it is not part of Argentina whatsoever. It's important that we should preserve the international nature of Antarctica from any possible encroachment by the Argentinians or by anybody else. And of course, there are not only diplomatic reasons for doing that, there are important commercial reasons for doing that as well. My honourable friend mentioned, I think, Rockhopper, a very fine Wiltshire oil company who are currently considering what they can do in the South Atlantic. And I'm very delighted to help them in any way I possibly can to make sure that their rights of exploration, if indeed that's what they decide to do, are indeed preserved against any possible commercial objection by the Argentinians or indeed by anybody else. But our forces in the Falklands, as my honourable friend said, are second to none and are ready to repel any border. However, I do have one concern, and this was a matter which was raised in the House of Commons in the Chamber last Thursday during the defence debate, namely that by the end of the current Strategic Defence Review, we will have an army of some 82,000 people. To many parts of the world, many definitions, 82,000 people is not an army. It's a defence force. 100,000 people is normally the level above which you have an army. That is the smallest army since the Crimean War. Our Navy has been decimated and our RAF cut in half. If there were to be an encroachment of the kind there was in the Falklands today, we would not be able to produce a task force as we did then. It would not be, we could not do it. We simply don't have the resources to do it. Now that seems to me to be entirely wrong, and I said on Thursday during the debate, that it seems to me as a nation, if we have a moral duty, whether it be in the Falklands or Gibraltar or elsewhere around the world, if we have a moral duty to be doing what we ought to be doing in the world, we must have the resources to be able to do that. And I fear very much, Mr. Crausby, that the Strategic Defence and Security Review has resulted in there being a defence force in this country which is not sufficient to carry out the tasks which the Foreign Office is requiring of us. So all I'd say with regard to this particular debate is that the Minister who was responding to it might wish to consider whether or not he could make his department, the Foreign Office, could make stronger representations to the Treasury as to the quantity of money which is available for the defence of the realm, so that if we ever had to do anything of a similar nature again, we could once again carry out a task force of the kind that we are remembering today. Mr. Crausby, it does seem to me that the message we're sending from here is incredibly clear to the people of the Falklands, to the United Nations, the United States, and to the rest of the world, namely that we believe that the people of the Falklands have every right for self-determination. They must be allowed to decide what their future is, and we will use military force, if necessary, or certainly military defensive force, to ensure that is the case. But I think the message we should send out today also is stronger than that, namely that we are determined to do the same elsewhere in the world. We are determined that the rights of people to make up their own minds about their future. We are determined that a free and independent liberal economy, that democracy, these are things that we as a nation stand for, and we demonstrated that we stood for them during the Falklands War. That we're ready to stand for them elsewhere in the world, but in order to do so, we need sufficient defence forces and defence investment to be able to carry those tasks out.